So I wanted to just answer some questions really quick with regards to Andrew Huberman's podcast 59, The Science of Love and Desire. All right, when he gets to the part and he's talking about the autonomic nervous system and how it's able to synchronize with other people and stories and things of this nature, this is one of the least surprising things when you understand engineering and biology. When you think about a system, right, there's this thing called a aliased frequency, which I think that's how you pronounce it, but it's basically the minimum sample rate that you need in order to acquisition data without aliasing the data. So any frequency, like let's say you wanted to record something and it goes off at 20 hertz, you need to be able to record and sample at least, if I said 20 hertz, then it would require 40, and like 41 hertz. You'd want to technically be a little bit over double. So what happens, and how, if you've ever seen the blind spot test on Google or you haven't done that, you should definitely do it. You'll see how your consciousness is capable of just painting in your reality. This is the visual representation, the intuitive way of seeing exactly how you live in a mental model, but this is how you know for a fact. If you've ever used like a phone, or you've ever seen like an LED flashing in a camera, or you've seen like a recording of helicopter blades or tires, and you see how at some frequency they get to a point where it's no longer increasing linearly, it gets to a point where the blades are going back and forth, the lights will be on randomly and off randomly. This is the aliasing of the data, which I mentioned with aliased frequency. Our conscious resolution has been measured in many ways. It's very limited. I think the upper end is, people will say around 120 bits a second, versus the lowest end I've heard was like 40 bit a second. This means that at some frequency, right, it's going to get to a point where we're no longer going to see a flashing light. So if you're looking at a flashing LED, you'll see it on, off, and then eventually it'll get to a point where it seems like it's just getting brighter. Or like maybe if you're watching 240 hertz TV versus 120 hertz, it seems like it's moving faster even though it's not. This is just the model of our reality. This is how, and the only reason why the model of our reality is as accurate as it is because of the autonomic nervous system. Right? The fact that we're not aliasing data, the fact that we can represent that flashing LED as a brighter light, the fact that we can see the helicopter blades spinning and they don't start doing that back and forth, this shows you that our eyes and our conscious perception does not it can't function the way in which an actual camera lens would. What we are living in is a mental model, right? And like I said, check yourself on the Google, just do the blind spot test. So the reason why it's definitely the autonomic nervous system is because, well, unless there's something else that's fast enough to control your arteries, your heart rate, it controls so much. The amount of processes that it does and the way in which it responds to the environment is actually analogous to a computer, not our conscious brain, right? Our brain and the way in which our consciousness functions is actually more like a controller, a microcontroller, right? So this is where the data is collected. But our consciousness and our decisions that we can make, where I can pick up my hand or whatnot. You've heard Andrew Huberman mention many times, you have this go, no go. You have the ability to determine affect, whether or not something is good or bad. That shows you right there that what happens is you're getting directed somewhere, right? You don't get to choose your thoughts, your dreams. You just have them. You experience a sensation. You wake up happy, sad, feeling, and then you basically are constantly at a very quick rate just making yes, no, good, bad. You're just making on-off decisions. We're not a processor. A processor can add, subtract, multiply. If you were a processor, you could decide right now that you're just going to shut off the sensory input from your right eye and leave the left eye on. You could decide, I'm going to turn the sensitivity up or down on my ears. I don't want to feel something. You don't have that ability. You have the ability to direct focus inward or outward, more aware. You have the ability to go, no go, like the fight or flight response, or to determine something is good or bad. But until you can decide that tomorrow at 3:00 you're gonna start contemplating this and that sensation, like unless you can tell me what you're planning on thinking, if you can't do a mental model, just consider any of the functions of an actual computer or processing unit and let me know how that correlates to what your experience is. Where are your buttons? Where are your inputs, outputs? If you were a processor, when it's time to go to bed, you would just shut down or go to sleep. But in reality, this is not what you are. you're far more like right here, right? You've plugged into a computer that's telling you what to do, and it seems like it's making decisions, right? It's sending and receiving signals with another controller over there, right? Like it's saving the data here to a card, but unlike a processor, it can't really make a ton of decisions. The only thing it can do is what it's already been programmed to do. So like for instance, I plug out the card. Because I didn't program it to respond to that, it just screws around, right? Reset it. I programmed it to do that, but you think it's consciously processed, like it doesn't know where that, it just, you know what I mean? It's literally, it's a stepped input, you know, and you consider all the ways in which, not just reality, all the ways in which you can respond to your world. We're basically a microcontroller sitting on top of a large three-dimensional hard drive, which is capable of growing and changing the data. But this mental model we live in is something that we've built in our dreams based on, this is the big thing too with AI. The problem that we're having right now, and I'm switching a little bit, with AI vision, is that they're trying to take really, really high level and high resolution imagery, and then they're trying to cut back and model backwards. In reality, we work completely opposite to this. What happens is, if anything, you don't model anything, you don't create a model of anything that's not necessary. So like, let's say there was some sort of material, something that you never interacted with, like air. You wouldn't actually, why would you, even if you can see it through your sensory output, right? Like let's say my autonomic nervous system is getting information and it can see through some amount of whatever that I have, that I can see the air. The fact that it's not a requirement, it's not necessary, like being able to see it would be a distraction. It's not gonna make its way into my mental model. I'm not going to have a dream about it where I place meaning to like an arbitrary thing. So, for instance, snakes can see an infrared, right? Well, why can't you see an infrared? Well, that'd be extremely like distracting. Like if you could see an infrared, then like, you know, like that wouldn't give you any benefit and cost you, and you'd see yourself. Whereas a snake in the grass, cold-blooded, hunting things that are warm like mammals, it'd be very useful to be able to see warm-blooded objects, right? This applies to everything, but it's very important. You do the blind spot test if you haven't done it. Look up what Nyquist frequency is, and just start doing little tests with yourself, and understand that the way in which we are told to act and behave is completely contrary to how the biology functions from like a physics standpoint, right? Like how, considering electricity, you know, like the laws of electricity, hydromechanics or fluid mechanics, like basic physics, like these things that I'm talking to you about are things that are like supported by physical laws, right? These aren't things that are like theory. This is physical laws based on information collected from all the tests. None of them argue. It's just that for whatever reason, no engineer has ever spent any time really learning anatomy and neurobiology and stuff to this nature. It wasn't until even this generation that someone like me would have access to this kind of data where I could learn from Andrew Huberman, pull up Anatomy Zone, pull up an Ninja Nerd, right? So understand that I have a lot. There's a lot more I would like to say, teach you guys. But you know, if you have any questions, please ask. And you know, this is my YouTube channel, so